Yes, well, no one likes pain, do they? It's kind of, that's the, maybe that's the driver behind so much of our behavior on an individual and collective level. We don't like it, so we'll go to tremendous lengths to try to avoid it, of course. And there's a very interesting text in the Buddhist tradition, which uses the analogy of arrows. Don't think I talked about this last time, did I? No. Okay. So the text goes that when you have pain, it's as if you're pierced by an arrow. And then we know no other response than to resist and resent that arrow. And then it's as if we're pierced by a second arrow. So now we have the pain of two arrows. It's such a great image. So the first arrow is unavoidable in life. In the text, it talks about physical pain, but I think it can be any pain. That there's going to be pain of loss, grief, people we love die. We're going to have injuries. We're going to get ill. Physical pain is a part of life at some point for everybody. And I'm not glamorizing it here. That is just a true fact. But, and other pain, all these other pains of loss and grief and so on. But it's like we're so habituated to resist and contract against it. So that it's so immediate. We hold the breath, we grip in the body, and we push it away. Not literally, but there's this kind of inner momentum of pushing away, which is the resistance. And I often think it's the resistance that's the problem. It's not the pain. The pain's horrible, of course, it's unpleasant, but it's the resistance that ruins our life. And then the text also talks about resentment, that it's not fair, why me, poor me, it shouldn't be like that. And of course, that comes up with things like the global pandemic, where probably a lot of us have got thoughts of something's gone wrong. It shouldn't be like this. Well, why not? I'm sorry to put it like that, but we knew that we've been told that pandemics come along every now and then in human cultures, so it was going to happen one day. But there is this arising, but it shouldn't be like this. Something's gone wrong. The world's gone wrong. Actually, this is just the way things are. And in fact, as a sort of little aside, I was listening to a historian. I may have said this last time, a historian on the radio who was saying, if you look at human history, what's happening now is much more normal. The complacency and the privilege that so many of us had pre-global pandemic, that was abnormal. I'm 61. I've lived in countries where there's never been war on my land. That's incredibly unusual in human history. I've never had famine, very unusual in human history. And I didn't really have much death in my life until the last 10 years. I mean, that is, if you look at human history, that is so unusual. But I just thought that was normal. And then we have a global pandemic and it's like, oh, everything's gone wrong. Actually, this is just the way things are. So even with the pandemic, I think, that the practice for us is to work with the resistance and resentment that this has happened. And then very interestingly, in this Buddhist text, it says that, and then the individual knows of no other response than to seek sensuous desire. So that's very interesting as well. So in modern speak, you've got the unpleasant, you've got the pain, unpleasant, you resist, you resent, and then you distract. And you just reach for some kind of sensory stimulus to distract you from your experience. And I sometimes wonder whether the enormous amount of consumerism in the world is some kind of collective distraction from the existential situation that we're all faced with. We think shopping will solve our existential situation, or food, or whatever it might be. And I'm not saying any of this in a pejorative, judgmental sense. It's more like I'm just trying to understand what goes on the individual and the collective level. So individually, we have pain, we resist, we resent, and then we crave. I mean, and in my case, it's, I get addicted to my phone. It's just mindless surfing of the internet for some kind of stimulation to distract me from my situation. But I think collectively, I mean, it is amazing the amount of consumerism in the world, given how little we really need as humans. And then in this text, it says that the person who has trained their mind, they still have the first arrow. You know, we can never avoid the first arrow as long as we've got a human body and live in this world. But they do not resist and resent that arrow. So they are not pierced by a second arrow, and they do not have the need for this craving for sensuous desire or sensuous impressions. And I think that's a very beautiful teaching. So it is possible, and this is my experience to some extent, it's possible we acknowledge the unpleasant when it arrives. We notice the arising of resistance, which was always accompanied by breath holding in my experience and teaching. You know, this is, I don't want this. So we notice that, we release, we let go, we settle, we take it one moment at a time, as I talked about last time. And we can gradually free ourselves of this automatic reaction of, I don't like this, I don't want this, it's not fair. Settle, rest, yield. I think yield is a beautiful word. You sort of yield into the body, yield into the moment, yield into the breath. And then you can end up with much more contentment with much less.
The development of the skill of non-resisting, right? Or, said inversely, right, the skill of acceptance is really key, I think, to the whole endeavor.
Yeah.
And like many of the things we talk about on this podcast, a skill that you never get taught this, right, in any kind of official curriculum. So the world goes to heck in a global pandemic, and there's a lot of pain, which we have no choice about. But in some, I don't want to make it sound like some overly positive Pollyannish thing, but it is also true that it is an opportunity to develop the skill of acceptance. Yeah. And I wondered if you could say more about that. That this why is this so important, right? Like, why is this so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the absolute crux of the matter, that when in all my life living with physical pain and my teaching, it's the resistance that's the issue. It's the resistance that ruins your life. It's not the actual situation itself. So in my case, and many people I teach, the physical pain is highly unpleasant. So I'm again not suggesting that, oh, I love my pain. The pain's horrible. But one can learn to live with that, and I'll say more about that in a moment. But it's that impulse to contract against it and to resist it, that leads to what we call secondary suffering, which is the second arrow. And again, in the text, it's got two arrows, but in reality, one is it's like you're just impaled on all these arrows that are the fruit of resistance. And it might be mentally catastrophizing, like, oh my God, it's going to go on forever. My life is ruined. When are they going to sort out? The government's so useless, yada, yada, all the stuff we generate mentally, emotionally, fear, depression, anxiety. And crucially, in the case of physical pain, you get secondary physical tension. So you've got the unpleasant sensations plus breath holding, plus tension, plus resistance. That's going to make your pain a lot worse. So the whole issue is, well, how, as you say, how does one work with resistance? I think that is the nub of the problem. It's not so much how does one work with pain, because that when we work with resistance, quite naturally, more acceptance arises for the pain.